I felt like I was about to die as my soul had already drifted from my body and floated over to my mother's side. Right now, she was sitting by Alice's hospital bed with a worried expression on her face. "You'll be all right, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." Alice's eyes were brimmed with tears as she asked, "Am I going to lose my legs? If that happens, I'll become a burden to you guys." When my husband heard her words, he immediately held her hands and said softly, "That's not going to happen, Alice. Look, Mom brought all the doctors here. You're going to be just fine." Alice nodded. Then she hesitated for a moment before asking, "What about Vanessa? Is she okay?" In that split second, my heart was filled with hope. If my mother remembered me, perhaps there was still time to save my children. However, my hope shattered in the next second. When my mother heard Alice's words, anger filled her eyes. Her voice was as cold as ice as she said, "You are hurt because Vanessa insisted on going to the mall. When we get back, I'll make sure to teach her a lesson." In that split second, a wave of bitterness swept through me as I watched my father stand by the side in silence. He opened his mouth and tried to say something. Nevertheless, he said nothing in the end. The doctors surrounded Alice's bed and did all sorts of examinations. In the end, they concluded that her injuries were nothing serious and merely just some scrapes. As my mother personally wrapped her wounds, my husband ruffled Alice's head and comforted her gently. "With Mom's skills, you don't need to worry about having any scars. Once Vanessa gives birth to the children, I'll divorce her and bring one of the babies for you, as we discussed before. That way, you won't have to go through the pain of giving birth yourself." My mind immediately became filled with white noise. Did he marry me just because he wanted me to get pregnant for the sake of Alice, just because she didn't want to endure the pain? Am I nothing more than a mere baby-making tool? At that moment, my mother smiled and said, "I told you before that Vanessa should bear a child for Alice. It's fortunate that she's carrying twins. It's what she owed Alice in the first place." I felt a pang in my chest as I turned to look at my mother. There was no grief greater than despair. When Liam pursued me, he had been so attentive that I once believed he was my true love. Yet little did I know that he would whisper Alice's name on our wedding night. At that moment, I was furious yet utterly powerless. My mother refused to let me divorce him and forced me to watch as my husband cared for another woman. Initially, I didn't want to get pregnant since I was afraid of the pain. Plus, my husband didn't love me either. Oddly, they suddenly showered me with affection one day. My mother coaxed me gently, saying that she wanted to become a grandmother. Just like that, I let my guard down and agreed to it. Only now did I know that she did all of those just for Alice. "Hey," my father called out with hesitation. "Shouldn't we check on Vanessa? She's still pregnant." The smile on my mother's face vanished the very next second. Then she dialed my number in annoyance. On the other hand, a nurse handed the phone to my dying body, and I could feel the rage in my mother's voice as she shouted, "Vanessa, I want you to apologize to Alice this instant." However, I couldn't respond. After all, I was already on the brink of death. The nurse, unable to contain her disapproval, sighed and said, "Dr. Miranda, Miss Tyson had a miscarriage. She is dying."
Impossible.
I heard my husband, Liam, who was a renowned obstetrician, declare with certainty, "She's 8 days from her due date. Tell her to stop with the act and apologize to Alice immediately." It was true that I was still 8 days from my due date. Regardless, things changed since I had shielded Alice from the crash. Yet I could say nothing. All I could do was watch as my mother cursed and hung up the phone. It was at that very moment that I finally gave up. As the nurse's urgent calls faded away into the distance, I realized I was truly dead. My soul was now tethered to my mother's side. All I could do was watch them being happy together, utterly devastated. I found it all ironic. After all, Alice's injuries were minor. Yet my mother, who was a hospital director, and my husband, who was a chief physician, insisted she be hospitalized for a week. Meanwhile, my babies and I could only die. "Mom, Vanessa didn't mean to drag me to the mall," Alice said as she lay on Liam's back. Her voice was filled with guilt as she said, "She probably just wanted to drink the chicken soup, so she brought me along to buy some. My injuries aren't that serious, so you and Liam should check on her." Then she put on a forced smile. I couldn't help but laugh as I turned my attention to her. I couldn't believe she was still trying to make my mother turn against me when I was already dead. I knew that my mother had specifically prepared the chicken soup for her. Thus, I only asked if there was still any soup left. However, Alice began to tear up and said, "You can have it, Vanessa. Please don't be mad at Mom. I won't drink it." Just as I was confused by her words, my mother stormed out of the kitchen and scolded me harshly. Faced with this sudden outcome, I was hurt and went straight back to my room. A while later, Alice came to my room and insisted I accompany her to the mall. When I refused her request, she said it was my mother's idea. Thus, I could only relent and go with her. Then we encountered a car accident. However, my mother would never know the truth, nor would she believe my tale. Sure enough, as soon as she helped Alice down from Liam's back and into the car, she began her speech. "There's no need to check on her. You're too kind-hearted, Alice. That's why Vanessa kept bullying you ever since you were little. Did you see her visit you when you've been in the hospital for so many days? I won't go, Liam won't go, and no one else should either. She needs to learn her place, and this is a good lesson to start with." As she spoke, she even shot a glance at my father, who was in the driver's seat. I knew it. Even if I were alive and arguing with her to defend myself, she would only slap me and accuse me of being a cruel person. I had already gotten used to it over the years. Alice snuggled happily into my mother's embrace and said, "It's okay, Mom. You're the person I love the most. I will do anything for you." My mother looked at her softly and gently stroked Alice's head. I felt dazed as I observed the scene. I used to receive that same gentleness before I was 5. However, everything changed when Alice came to live with us. I remembered that time when she pointed at my room and asked my mother, "Mommy, is this my room?" "Yes," my mother answered gently. Then I was forced to move into a storage room, where they hastily set up a bed. That storage room soon became my new bedroom. Back then I told my mother that I didn't want to sleep there. Initially, I thought she would comfort me like she used to. However, she only said, "Vanessa, Alice's parents died because they saved you. Yet, you're unwilling to even give her a room. Just stay there for now. I'll make you another room later." Thus, I accepted her decision and tried to be good to Alice. Yet, when Alice was just 3 years old, she already knew how to pour freshly made milk onto her hand and cried out for my mother. As I desperately tried to explain what had really happened, all I got in return was a harsher scolding from my mother. "If you make a mistake, you must admit to them. Alice is only 3. Yet you're blaming her for something she didn't do. You've disappointed me, Vanessa." At first, my mother may have really wanted to prepare a new room for me. Alas, under Alice's constant manipulations, she ended up believing that I only deserved to live in the storage room. I had waited for my mother to take me away from that little room ever since I was 5. Sadly, as I waited for years and years, only death awaited me. "Alice, hearing you say that makes me jealous. If Mom is the person you love the most, what about me?" Liam joked from the side. The comment brought giggles from both Alice and my mother. Alice blushed and playfully hit Liam. The atmosphere in the car was endlessly cheerful. They were so happy. It was at that moment that I realized I was completely out of place. I wasn't their family. I was nothing to them. I desperately tried to escape, but my soul was bound to my mother's side, unable to go anywhere. All I could do was watch as they laughed while mocking me. Liam gently placed Alice on the sofa once they returned home. Then, my mother quickly fumbled with the remote and turned on Alice's favorite drama. On the other hand, my father silently brought over a plate of fruit and set it beside her. "Alice, why don't you watch some TV while I cook your favorite food?" said my mother, who rarely cooks. Then, she pulled out the tablet to look up for some cooking tutorials. All Alice needed to do was sit there and receive Liam's offerings while watching TV. She didn't have to do anything, as she could effortlessly capture everyone's attention. I felt a wave of grief fill my heart as I watched the familiar, heartwarming scene before me. This was supposed to be my home, yet every inch of this place was filled with horrible memories. I remember when we first moved into this house. Back then, I was thrilled to finally have my own bedroom, even though it was only a third the size of Alice's. However, I was just happy not to sleep in the storage room anymore. As I came downstairs for dinner, Alice, who was 10 years old, blocked my way and said, "Are you that happy, Vanessa? Although I didn't understand her words, years of never being able to win against her made me instinctively take a step back. Still, she gave me a twisted smile before crying out my name as she threw herself down the stairs. I didn't think twice and ran down to check on her. However, by the time I got there, she was curled up in Mom's arms while looking helpless. "Mom, don't blame Vanessa. I can give her my room," she murmured weakly. She nailed me to a post of shame with one single sentence. After my mother heard her words, she slapped me and screeched angrily, "Are you trying to kill her, Vanessa? How could I have such an ungrateful daughter? You are selfish, a liar, and a cruel person. Her parents saved you. How can you bear the thought of hurting her?" I shook my head feebly, insisting that Alice had fallen on her own. Alas, what I got in return was a beating from her, leaving me writhing on the floor in agony. "Can't you be a decent person? Tell me, can you do it?" It really hurt me. Then, from that day on, my mother never believed a single word I said. At the same time, I was sent back to the storage room, the space where all the unwanted items were stored. My mother made an array of special dishes. "Alice, this soup base is made from the finest spices. You've always loved curry noodles, haven't you? You always say the ones outside aren't fresh enough. Also, this entire lobster is for you. You're always too frugal with yourself. You would always give your lobster to Vanessa. If only she was as kind as you." I looked blankly at the feast laid out on the table. Only now did I know that my mother was willing to make curry noodles, and said it tasted great. How ridiculous. Back then, I asked our helper to prepare an instant pack of curry noodles when I was pregnant. However, Alice was on her period, and threw a fit since she was craving it. So, my mother yelled at me for eating something so disgusting, and told me to eat it outside. It was the middle of winter. The wind lashed at my face and chilled my heart. It was unfortunate that my soul felt no hunger. Otherwise, I would have vomited all over this table. As I looked at the baked cheese crabs, lobsters, and garlic oysters on the table, I cackled since I was allergic to seafood. Then, I looked at the remaining dishes, which were pork ribs and prawns. Since I had mild bronchitis, I couldn't eat pork. Thus, the only thing I could eat was a plate of plain boiled white cabbage. If I were sitting here and eating the cabbage, I could imagine my mother scolding me. "Who are you trying to guilt-trip this time, Vanessa? If you want to eat, just eat it. If not, get back to your room and stop ruining our mood." Alice loved seafood, and Mom always seemed to forget that I was allergic to it. Every time I faced a table full of seafood, Alice would offer me some of it. When I reminded them I was allergic to seafood, my mother would either scold me or throw a spoon at me. It had always been this way. After dinner, my mother returned to her bedroom, and I had no choice but to drift in behind her. She seemed anxious as she paced back and forth around the room. "What's wrong?" my father asked softly as he came in. My mother simply furrowed her brow and said nothing. My father looked at her. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'm going to the hospital. Vanessa hasn't been heard from for a week, and her due date is tomorrow." My mother snapped the second he made that suggestion. "No one is going anywhere. 7 days have passed, and she still hasn't apologized to Alice. How dare she act so arrogant?" My father cowered and mumbled, "She did have a car accident. Plus, she's pregnant." My mother swept her skincare products off the table and barked. Alice didn't suffer anything serious when she was the driver. Vanessa wasn't even the one driving. So what could have happened to her? I bet she is still holding grudges against Alice. As my mother spoke, she seemed to grow confident with her claims. She was the one who caused the fire, and it killed my brother and his family. Alice was only 3 when she lost her parents. All Vanessa ever did was compete for affection, and never thought about how Alice would feel. Moreover, her jealousy grew worse when she got older. Do you know that she tried to kill Alice? Do you know how many horrible things she had done to Alice over the years? Before I could process the pain, my mind went blank. What did Mom mean when she said I was the one who set the fire? As I thought about it, I shuddered and felt chills run down my spine. Even though I was only about 5 years old, I remembered it clearly. That day, I was pretending to sleep to fool my aunt after she had tucked me in. Just moments ago, Alice had wanted my butterfly hair tie, but her mother scolded her. So she became upset. I wanted to give it to her secretly, so I pretended to be asleep. Shortly after they left, I smelled smoke. When I opened the door, I saw the house in flames. I desperately called for my aunt and uncle, and I remember them rushing back toward me. What happened next was hazy. All I could remember was the sound of the wind whistling in my ears. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, and my uncle and aunt had died. However, I was certain I had never started that fire. Hello. What is it? My mother's tone was sharp. Don't tell me that Vanessa has caused trouble again. Tell her to come home now and apologize to her sister. No one is going to put up with her act. When I heard her words, I snapped out of my daze and saw my mother answering a call from the hospital. After a long silence on the other end, a voice finally spoke. Dr. Miranda. Miss Tyson has been dead for a week. She suffered severe injuries and even had a miscarriage. However, we didn't have anyone to help her since you had called all the doctors away. In the end, she died along with her unborn children.